You know what I'm having the experience of at this moment is really just appreciating you slowing down and being willing to unpack and explore something before it gets to, so we sometimes call it the small c kind of irritation or friction versus, the big C conflict where the stakes are high, both parties are triggered and super annoyed. And so I think there's value. I wish more of us spent the time to unpack and focus on the tiny little things, because I think it's those interventions that allow us to just do something different in the moment. So,
welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between Agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard, and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence.
Hello and welcome to what is a first for the Product Agility Podcast, a live coaching demonstration. Now, Marsha's book, and I'm just going to lean to one side here. So I grab it, so hold it up to the camera so viewers on YouTube can see this. Build your model for leading change. Fantastic book, which we explored in some depth in episode number 1, which I urge you all to go and listen to if you haven't already heard it, because it will set you up nicely for what we're going to be doing today, which is a live coaching demonstration based around some of the key tenets of the book. Now, whilst we were getting ready for this conversation, we were exploring potential obstacles in the way that I communicate with people that I'd like to overcome, just to let everybody know that the topic that I'm going to be talking about, I have chosen. It's something which is important to me. The people that are involved within this context, they would have given their permission for this episode to be released. And obviously with confidentiality kind of not really being such a thing when you're willing to open yourself up and share it on the internet in such a way, I would ask that if anything I say, anything we go into means something to you, if it kind of raises something that you would like to talk about one-on-one with someone, then please do find somebody to talk to. Me, I know Marsha, maybe they could contact you, or just someone. If something comes up that you feel is important to you, don't let that sit. Please do go and find someone to talk to. Is there any other serious stuff I should mention, Marsha, before we kind of move on to
I love the one that you just mentioned, and I love the idea of just tapping someone could be a support mechanism. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, this is going to be, this will be a first for me, a second for Marsha, and something which I hope you all get a lot from, because I remember when I was training as a professional coach, I couldn't find any really valuable coaching demonstrations online. I'm sure there's a few that exist, but actually I found it a bit of a challenge. So I hope that if you are considering a coaching journey of any description, that this is of some value to you, in addition to the value that our listeners are just going to find anyway. Now, Marsha, as a little bit of a lead into the coaching conversation, could you explain to our audience what kind of problems are presented to you when you're having these coaching conversations, and why do people find them useful?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, so using structural dynamics is kind of a core to the model for how I coach and how really all of us at TeamCatapult coach. And what sits underneath that model is the perspective and the theory that really any time we're working in systems, so whether that's a family system or work system, anytime where there's more than one person, we would call that a system of people. And the dynamics that emerge in systems are either moving us forward or holding us back in some way. And I think they often show up as something that we might get under our skin a little bit, or we might be a little frustrated by. I often say one of the key flags that something's happening in the system is when you start having the same conversation over and over again, and you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, I thought we already talked about this, or I thought we had this conversation. We're fresh off the holidays, so many of us might have a backlog of things. Having spent time with families, family systems can be notorious for some of those issues, but I think the situations that emerge are really great to explore, because when we're seeing something in a system that we don't like, there will often be a part that we're playing in it. And so I think that's the place where it would be so much easier to just make it about the other person and about them getting it wrong or being difficult or, you know, yeah, I want them to be fixed. But there's often a part that we're playing, which I think is sometimes the harder piece to look at about, what's the aspect. So anyways, that's really why we bring it into coaching conversations. And you made a note about, when you were learning coaching conversations. I'll just put a caveat on the end of this because if anybody's in the midst of a coaching certification program, chances are we might not model here today a purely coaching model that has the coach stay purely in just asking questions. So you might find me bringing in a little bit of content and asking you to think about or reflect on it. So just a caveat for anybody.
No, great point.
Yeah.
Great point. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely right, because this isn't going to be like a standard like ICF style.
Yes.
Share your coaching skills. This would be somewhat different. And I think, when people say, well, how on earth does this relate to product and agility? Well, like the types of communication issues that exist are so prevalent between product teams and agile teams, or even within product teams, or just within agile teams, or within product and agile teams and their senior management and their leadership. We all experience these conversations that we just don't seem to ever be happy with. And that's the topic that the problem that I'm going to be bringing up today is something which I know is very prevalent in many organizations, in many teams, and something that I'm experiencing right now with someone in my life. Marsha, I need to remember not to be the coachy person in this and not to ask the coach type conversations. So I will just ask, and I don't mean this in a coachy way, but like, where do we begin?
Well, Ben, so let's just start with a little bit of the challenge that you're noticing. So maybe you can give me just a little bit of context of what might be happening, and you're having this experience of something kind of recurring, or it's starting to make its way into your awareness about something that's happening.
Okay. So this is in relation to my startup. We've been working on an idea now for 18 months. We're hitting a point where things are getting real and we're really working towards getting that first MV designed and then out in the wild. And we're super excited. But what I've noticed is that there's a particular conversation, or maybe a collection of conversations, which I seem to be revisiting. And I believe we're revisiting. I maybe it's all in my head, but I do feel like we have similar conversations time and time again around stuff that is maybe slightly more technical than it is conceptual. So I have a technological background. I'm not as technically minded as I used to be, but I still got a passion for it. I have a decent understanding of some of the key elements of it. And there are certain things which I'm really keen just to get known and get understood. And when we talk about the more technical aspects, I don't feel like I'm able to put myself across in the right way, because it just feels like we're looping back round, and that the things that we get stuck on are like there's a misunderstanding. I'll be talking about something technical, it will then be taken as something conceptual, and then he'll start talking about trying to solve the conceptual thing, and I'm just want to talk about the technical thing, and we just seem to get stuck in this loop every now and again.
So one of the things that I'm hearing is that there's a technical side and a conceptual side that are playing out in your conversations. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by technical? Like what's that look like? Or
it's conversations such as, do we go for a managed WordPress host or a cloud computing solution and we installed a managed WordPress on our own? There are certain plugins or extensions that we're probably going to do well for using initially for the MVP because it saves us time. And I want to understand the technical limitations or the extensibility of some of those plugins. So particularly around a topic we call verification. There's certain things we want to verify. I have an idea in my mind about how they could be implemented, and I put together a proof of concept, which kind of worked. But I would like our developer to actually run through that and say, yes, it would work, it wouldn't, you got the wrong end of the stick, maybe it would work this way. But when we talk about verification, it seems to loop back round to be on the manual element of the manual process element of the verification rather than the technical implementation. And I've said a few times, I know it's the implementation aspect, but then it just comes back to verification process, I feel. Does that help?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm curious about what's the experience like for you in those conversations? So you've said a little bit about in my language, what I would say is that it's maybe feeling like your point of view isn't being heard. But how would you say it?
Yeah, I would say that maybe the frustration comes from the fact I don't feel like I'm understood.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's hearing, but I don't feel like I'm understood. So maybe that's kind of on me, and that's how I feel. And then I get to a point where I start to question myself. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Actually, I quite enjoyed the question of myself, because then I begin to wonder, well, is it really that important? I'm not that technical. Maybe this is actually something which is just, we'll talk to the dev and he'll be like, oh, no, it's fine. No, you got it absolutely wrong. It's going to be this. We got it absolutely right. It's going to be as you say. And that's what happens. So I go from the frustration of not feeling understood to then wondering, is it even worth bringing it up? And should I just kind of gloss over it? Should we just move on?
And can I just say for a moment, I think that this is where so many of us get in our conversations. In structural dynamics, we would call it sort of speaking in two different languages. So it's that middle layer of communication domains. Impossibly, it's a hypothesis, because I wouldn't really know unless I was listening to your, sentence by sentence dialogue. But my sense is that there's two different communication domains at play. So there's three: power, the language of getting things done; affect, care and concern for others; and meaning, which is purpose, data, connection. So it's possible that there are two different communication domains, that you might be speaking one of those and your co-founder speaking another. And it creates that experience of feeling like we're just talking past one another. So I'm curious, as I say that, what comes up for you?
Relates to something you said to me before about me talking in meaning, and maybe that's what it is. But maybe, I think we are talking past each other. I can think I can see that makes sense to me. I then wonder, how do we what does it take right to then actually have a conversation where we don't just kind of zoom past each other, but we actually kind of meet and can move forward? Because I guess that this pattern will repeat itself. So actually having an idea of some things to experiment with to then overcome that would be beneficial.
Yeah. So one of the ways, in structural dynamics is to think about becoming trilingual. So there will be one domain that we will tend to just default to. If we were to stack rank them, it's the place that we're most comfortable. We go there frequently. So meaning, might be yours. Your co-founder might be in affect or power. And the place to go first would be to start to bridge to the domain that you guess your co-founder might be in. Because, so here's my question, here's another question for you, and you'd be hypothesizing at the moment, but I'm curious about what you think your co-founder's experience might be in those conversations.
Yeah, it would be a total guess. And,
you wouldn't know until you asked, but yeah.
Yeah. And mate, like, don't judge me for this. My guess is that there's maybe a slight element of, I don't know, like confirmation bias a little bit. Like there's the technical stuff, like we're on slightly different levels in relation to that. And that we're gonna, when any conversation where we're on different levels, often we just hook onto the stuff that we whoosh up the ladder of inference. We kind of, all of our assumption beliefs have kind of played out, and then we get to an action which is based on the data we've chosen to take from that situation. So I think when we're talking about verification process and that verification element, I'm talking about technically how do we implement like fine-grained permissions early on in that process. And what he's picking up is that the whole verification process. So I wonder if he just gets annoyed at me, maybe because he doesn't know what I'm talking about, or maybe he doesn't even realize that we are whooshing past because I'm not facing into it.
Yeah.
So he's never articulated any frustration or annoyance with this. He's always been very cordial and very cool with me when I keep on bringing this stuff up.
Mm.
So and he's not. I think he would mention it to me if it was annoying him.
Yeah. You know what I'm having the experience of at this moment is really just appreciating you slowing down and being willing to unpack and explore something before it gets to, so we sometimes call it the small c kind of irritation or friction versus, the big C conflict where the stakes are high, both parties are triggered and super annoyed. And so I think there's value. I wish more of us spent the time to unpack and focus on the tiny little things, because I think it's those interventions that allow us to just do something different in the moment. So just an acknowledgement of, taking something like this and beginning to just do some reflection on it. Here's a question for you. As you think about this scenario, I'm hearing possibly not feeling understood on your behalf, a hypothesis that your co-founder and you too might be sort of diving into making your own points every time, like the place that you're familiar with. And one of the things that can be really helpful in this is locating curiosity about those assumptions that each of us will be making. So one way is to speak in that language. So for example, if your co-founder speaks primarily in power, rather than starting an explanation deep in meaning, you might move to more curiosity about the other's perspective, and to do it from a place of power where we're inquiring about, things, what's the outcome and what are we looking for and what would it look like to produce that or make it look like a quality product. So what comes up as I say those things?
One thing I have thought about every now and again is if we are some level secretly in competition with each other.
Mm.
So not directly related to what you're saying, but it popped into my head when you're going through that.
Yeah.
Is that secretly maybe we're kind of jostling for position, and maybe there's an element of like neither of us wanting to admit that we're wrong with something because as much as we respect and love each other,
Yeah.
I think maybe there's an element of not wanting to seem inferior.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's about the other person winning. I think maybe it's more about sometimes, maybe it is even just all about me. Maybe I'm worried about kind of protecting my own sense of something here rather than him, because it is only hypotheses. As you mentioned, a lot of these things are hypotheses, but perhaps we are secretly in competition, or I view it as I'm secretly in competition. And I think I've lost some of my curiosity and empathy in certain situations. And perhaps that's been the root, or not the root, maybe that's part of the cause of it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm curious about as you reflect on the situation, you've said, there are places where you're feeling not quite understood. And I think that if we hold the perspective that actually the system is kind of mirroring something to us, I'm curious, and this is this can be, I think, a really hard question for all of us to look at. But I'm wondering if there might be a place where you are not understanding the other, or we're not seeking to understand.
I think so. I think it's, and I suppose talking as a founder and someone that's getting something off the ground, it's you spend a lot of time in thought land trying to kind of work through these things in your own mind, and then you get to a point where you want to see them manifested in some way. And I think that then that creates a pressure to make decisions and to get things done. And I think that then that, to what extent I feel that pressure maybe strips away from my ability to take the time to then really understand the other person's situation and their perspective and their point of view on things. And I think that we definitely feel the excitement of getting closer, and I definitely feel some element of wanting to make sure of really knowing about as much as I'm capable of knowing in relation to certain things. And I wonder if that's where, actually going back to the original kind of presenting problem, is that some of it is me being concerned of the implementability, if that's even a word, of what we're thinking, what we'd like to do, versus how much of it is it me just really wanting to understand how it will be done. And then I feel the pressure and the excitement. I've just kind of got in a slightly detrimental kind of loop of just seeking to know, not knowing, trying to get understood, don't feel like I'm understood, and just getting caught in that loop, which is just feeding itself, perhaps.
Yeah, could be. One of the other things structurally that I'm hearing that might be at play is how operating systems weave their way in. So the operating systems are the way in which we interact with the others in our system. And so open system is more collaborative. We're seeking to hear all voices. Closed system is less collaborative. It's, it might be something like if I'm feeling my area of expertise is the technical side, I might make moves from closed system, really trying to bring that in and really not seeking input from others. Random system is more innovation, creativity, and autonomy. So random system might be places where you and your co-founder find yourselves off in your own areas of expertise doing things and then coming back together and for certain pieces, but more autonomy. So one thing that might be at play in this, and co-founding is both exciting and it generates high stakes. I mean, there's a lot at stake from a really good perspective. But one of the other things that might be at play in addition to the domain that you're speaking in is the way that you're communicating with one another. So I'm curious about where you find yourselves predominantly in the operating systems between open, closed, and random.
Yeah. Because in my mind, it's trying to understand that difference between, random and closed. Because, for example, I went off and did some proof of concepts. I was just noodling around, trying some things out, trying to figure out what I think could work. And that was kind of random, I suppose. I was kind of innovative, kind of doing some ideas. And then we come back together, but then trying to seek consensus in that kind of open system way by collaborating and coming up to a point rather than doing it in a closed way almost. So I think it was kind of random to open when maybe like for both it could have been random to close. There's some areas where he's really strong and just kind of make the decision because I trust you on this.
And sometimes it can be that closed system is the system that can help set you both up for success. So closed system can set some boundaries and parameters. Like, we're going to go off and do this. In the example that you're giving of the conversation that you're repeating, even putting some closed system parameters on the way in which you might want to talk differently about it. So introducing the topic, saying, let's take some time to explore this. And I really want to understand, it can be making a move in closed system that can open you up to a more open system, more of a dialogic conversation.
Yeah, I find that really useful because the understanding your role and what you bring is one thing, but I think that what you're talking about here about random, open, and closed, I think is really useful. Yeah, and I think understanding when is it closed and what are we making decisions on or not is really is really useful. And I would never want, and I feel like maybe he's felt like it sometimes, but just to say yes, Ben, go ahead with it for exasperation. Rather than anything else, oh my god, just shut up about it. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I'm trying. Oh my god, can you just get over it and move on? But I seem to get stuck. So I think that that I find that very useful.
I'm curious about, as we've talked through this, where you're at in your thinking about the conversation that you and your co-founder are circling on.
I would like to, without wanting to sound mean about it, but I would like to try and have it again, almost, and see if we do end up back in the loop.
Yeah.
And so that I can just try and zoom out and observe what's happening and then better say, okay, right, okay, yeah. So I am definitely in this instance, behaving in a certain way, and I'm definitely not being curious. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to take a moment out and be a bit more curious and to maybe also point out about what I think I'm seeing, and also how I'm feeling and what I'm trying to get from it. Because I think that having that data fresh would be interesting. Or I might just bring it up and say, look, I've had this conversation a few times and deal with it that way. I'm not sure, but I think I'm definitely resolved to being more curious and having more empathy and just kind of and just relieving some of the pressure. And I'm definitely keen to have the conversation about, when is it open, when is it closed, and when is it random.
Yeah.
And maybe there is very little that's closed right now, but that will change over time. But I'd just be really keen to have that conversation so that we know when we're playing to our strengths, and we know when we can, what we're trying to achieve a bit, or how we're going to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
I think one way, of course, we're recording this, so your co-founder might listen in and know ahead of time. But I think one way to enter the conversation that might change the nature of how it unfolds would be for you to do a bystand, just like you've done with me here today, to name what it's like for you, like what you're noticing, what you're catching sight of, what the experiences that you're having, and then ask, what's the experience that your partner's having in the conversation? What do they notice? What curiosities do you have? And so that in and of itself can really just simply change the way the conversation starts out.
I'll consider that. I like it. I like the idea of doing that.
Yeah.
I'm just contemplating
what's happening for you as you think about that.
Yeah, but I feel that I've got options, and I'm struggling to, I think, in the moment, kind of figure out which one I'd like to try. I think because I haven't had the conversation almost about having the conversation about it, which is strange. And I think I need to and I also need to take some time out and reflect, because this is, it may seem like maybe like a trivial little thing, but I think that actually, if we can fix it, it will pay dividends. Yeah, but I'm curious. I think running through it and bringing it up again, I've gone off that idea. I don't like that anymore. Because I just kind of feel it's a bit mean, and I don't know in any way that I could bring it up that wouldn't be all contrived and planned out. And I kind of don't like that almost. I prefer just kind of leaning into it and being like, right, okay, like, this is how have you found our conversation around this? Tell me how you've been feeling about it, not in a scary, but help me understand a bit more, and I can share some of it too. And I wonder if that would be a nice way, a much more kind of me way of going about it. And also, if I think about how we would want to operate as a partnership, also help how I think our partnership will evolve. I know it'll be fruitful, and I believe it'll be successful. But I think that actually being able to take that time out to label stuff and talk about it honestly, I think is maybe how I would like the relationship to grow and evolve. So maybe I'll try and have a chat with him about doing that and kind of modeling some of that behavior between us.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Yeah. Do you feel like you have a path forward for now?
I do. It's funny when having these types of conversations, I suppose people always think that coaching has to be these big, you're trying to get over big obstacles, but I think, like you were saying, actually sometimes it's for little things that actually you can get over. If you can get over them, then it stops the bigger things becoming bigger things. And it's been very useful for me to really think through a lot of this. I haven't articulated it before, so thank you for your questions and your expertise, Marsha. It's much appreciated.
You're welcome. I just think that it's something that I wish all of us did more of. And I do, oftentimes I don't start working with co-founders and partners until they're much further along and they've spent 2, 3, 4 years sweeping a lot of things under the rug. And then by that time they get to 4 or 5 years. And I don't think it's a question of whether relationship challenges emerge in work partnerships. I think it's just a matter of when and how big they get. But when they get to the place where it's super hard and the stakes are so high, it's not that people can't work through them, it just takes longer. So just a huge acknowledgement about catching sight of things that might seem small and trivial. And I actually don't think they're small and trivial. I think they're little flags that say, hey, there's an opportunity here to talk about it, be more intentional, and use the small things to work through. So
if I can step out of the kind of coachy position for a moment, I think it's a really important lesson for people. You know, I suppose if I run through some scenarios I can think of over the last 18 months, whether it is I've experienced people within product teams who did deal with the small stuff, you know, over seemingly small stuff and deal with it and have the conversation, or they tried to have the conversations but it never got anywhere. That there was never any evidence that a person had been heard, and what that did was really detrimental. And I think of product teams and agile teams, and actually their inability to communicate, or just to get over the expectations that they have of each other and actually communicate clearly is a big deal. Or even I think I know some founders that I know who are maybe really reliant upon other people, and I wonder if it's because they don't want to have the harder conversations, or what they fear is harder conversations. And I think there's always this illusion. I interviewed somebody yesterday called Evan about facilitation, something that you know very well, and it's not something that I had made a note of it, but I didn't bring it up. But I think with dealing with these types of communication challenges, opportunities, as well as kind of facilitation, is that people think it's just something we should be able to do. And it should just happen. It's going to be easy. But actually, when you really think about it, you really look into it, in order for these scenarios to end up with something which everyone would deem as successful, there's usually a whole heap of effort and time that you need to put in to really lay the groundwork and really do the self-work to make sure that you make the most of these opportunities. It isn't, I think it's too easy to think it's just all like barefoot dancing through like fields of daisies holding hands, but actually there's a whole ton of rigor and professionalism that's required to make these situations successful.
I would actually hold that clarity about I think we all need a model for how we work with conflict. I think we all need a model for how we work with behavior, if this is the role that we're going to play. And it's in the creating the model that I think you get really clear about how you'd engage people. So it's a big yes, it's a big follow from me about what you're saying, in that there's rigor and there's intentionality. And on the outside, I think it might look like, to somebody watching it. I often say that about a facilitated session, just in general, that if you were just observing it, in somebody that does it really well, I think you just think, well, that was a really good meeting. You would not understand necessarily the mechanics and the intentionality around what's happening in the room. And I think the same is true of how we lead, where we get stuck, how we work with conflict. It's all of that.
It is. And I would recommend people check out Marsha's book, Build Your Model for Leading Change. I believe that maybe around this time, the little competition we would have been running would have ended, and there'd be one lucky listener who would have won a copy of the book.
Nice.
They're going to be lucky souls, because it's an awesome book. And I think it is, as I mentioned in the first episode, it invokes, if you allow it to, invokes a lot of self-reflection, and it invokes you to do and encourages you to do that self-work, which I think is one of the best parts about it. And I love I was talking to Steph, the producer, about this actually today, because she bought Reading the Room, David Cantor's book, and I just put it to one side, and I kind of recognized it. I was like, oh, you've got that. And we were saying how we both find it very exciting at the opportunity to codify some of the interactions that we're having and our communications systems. And I think that is a really fascinating thing that's, I think, invaluable, I'd say, for anyone that's listening. Honestly, doesn't matter what role you're in, what context you're in. I think there's a huge amount of value in Marsha's book and understanding more about all of this. So Marsha, I want to say thank you very much for for coaching me. It was a delight. and extraordinarily beneficial for me. And I really hope that those listening also, there was something in there for you all as well. I think if nothing else, making a quick note of Marsha's questions that she was asking and picking up on some of the styles and some of the things that were done would probably do a lot of us a whole heap of good. So Marsha, thank you very much for being so obliging with that.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for being willing to share it live. I think I said this to you earlier, I think there's a lot of courage, and I think we all need examples of how we think through these things. We all need it, including me.
Well, maybe, Marsha, maybe one day I'll coach you on something. And again, thank you everyone for listening. Come on this little journey, this little experiment with us. If you liked it and you would like more of these types of things where I'm pouring out my soul, then by all means do let us know on social media, because we're more than happy to experiment and try new and different things. So do let us know. Anyway, perhaps we'll draw this one to a close. Marsha, again, thank you so much for coming on. Everyone, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.